Debt has risen to levels unseen before in history, and now the problems have stretched out globally. And these are some signs of a financial crisis brewing today. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. One of the biggest problems that we are experiencing today in most countries around the world is debt. Now, debt is the system of control of the bankers, and they use this system to bind us to them, to make us dependent. Well, let's get into this information today, and perhaps we can suggest what the solution is. Look at Apple's stock right here. Now, of course, being the biggest company in the world at this moment, we know that Apple is obviously considered to be an unshakable stock. But right here, it has been subject to some downfalls over this day of trading here. Now, of course, this is just a short period of time over a large rise in the stock. I just wanted to note here showing you that anything can happen. There are up days and down days for any stock, for any commodity, and these are all part of larger and larger cycles that continue to repeat themselves. If you want to know about cycles, definitely the best book to read is At the Crest of the Tidal Wave, and that is by Robert Prechter. Good book right there for you. Now, one of the interesting dilemmas that we have today is similar to what has occurred in the past leading up to the housing bust. And you can see the top chart, which shows you from around the year 2002 up until the crisis began, and essentially what you have is the same commodity being affected, and that is lumber. And we have the same disconnect that is occurring here, and this is obviously a big issue. So one of the commodities that we need to look at to determine what's happening with the housing market is lumber, very important, in fact considered to be the most important, and that right here is showing us it is once again heading in a bad direction. Now this right here, it's obvious to so much of us listening and watching, but the US federal government debt to GDP ratio, it's actually worse than during World War I, worse than during the Civil War, and if you use the government's fake numbers, well then we're approximately at the Great Depression level. Not quite there yet, but as soon as you include the unfunded liabilities, then surely we have gone way over that. But even using their fraudulent numbers, we can see that we are approaching the same level of debt to GDP. But many will say, look, it's manageable. As long as the US continues to be the petrodollar, then nothing is going to happen. Nothing can shake this system. But I assure you, through all of my research, it indicates that everything is changing, and it's happening right now. The amount of debt cannot be sustained. What happened during the Great Depression here that they had this type of issue? Well, obviously, they experienced a major deflation in the stock market, nearly a 90% from its peak downward. What about the unemployment rates? What about all of the businesses that were shut down because of this occurring? Of course, we're headed in that same direction today. Now, one of the countries that is facing much turmoil, much debt, is Greece. Greece struggles to get citizens to pay their taxes. This is out of the Wall Street Journal. Tax collection is a top priority of reform plan from Athens. Now, obviously, there are taxes in for a reason. However, they suggest that, look, these people who don't want to pay their taxes, they think it's criminal, so on and so forth. You shouldn't have to really pay much taxes at all. In fact, if you look at the US as an example, the income tax put in as a temporary measure, as it was in most countries, put in as a temporary measure, and lo and behold, still there long after their promise, because that's just the way it is. The more taxes they take in, the more taxes they have to take. Quite the paradox. So this right here is simply what we are looking at is more taxation. Yes, people need to pay their taxes that they are legally binded to pay. That's pretty obvious. You can't get away from that in most cases. But when you have increased taxation, whether that's Obamacare, whether that's whatever sort of phony tax that they conjure up, you can't just continue to think that you can make people pay more and that is actually going to bring in more money. When in fact, if you just reduce the taxes, then that would give more people to spend money on the economy. Let's go into what I wrote about in my book, Taxing Our Way into Poverty. Governments of the West are implementing regulations and taxes and are destroying the business's ability to operate. And then I go in to suggest how China is doing this, for example, or I should say how these companies are moving to China and are doing so because they're taking advantage of the Chinese, their reduced regulations, reduced taxation. It simply is more beneficial to move over there. And this is quite sad because individuals in the West are losing jobs because that manufacturing is going overseas. Increasing the taxation is not going to lead to increased government revenue. Perhaps in the very, very short term, and that might be all they need in Greece. But in the long term, this doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work, especially when the big bankers don't have to pay anything, when the big corporations like GE don't have to pay anything. This is right here talking about Greece again, and they're talking about essentially what Greece is struggling with right now with their debt. But let's go into this. The extension of the 240 billion rescue package until the end of June staves off the need for controls, that's capital controls, to stem the flight of money from the country that in a worst case could have signaled Greece's expulsion from the Europe's currency block. So right there, they're basically saying, if you don't pay up, you're going to be kicked out. Now, obviously, they have these rules in place for a reason, because people need to pay in to this system that they've set up. I don't agree with the euro as a whole, but that's just the way it is for the time being. Now, they've also been given an extension here where they are still being drilled consistently on to pay up, pay up. Germany is basically saying to them, you better pay up or we're not giving out any more money. If you don't put these reforms into place, we're not giving you any more money. And that's the way this goes. So we'll have to keep an eye on it right here. Now, speaking of Germany, I wanted to note this out of the New York Times. Germany sells 5-year debt at a negative yield. Can you believe this? That they're actually selling to the public and they're buying it at a negative yield. That means you give them money knowing you're going to get less back. Wow, this world has certainly changed. The government notes set to mature in April 2020 with an average yield of minus 0.08%. I can't believe I'm reading this, that investors, hedge fund companies, and all these other companies and countries are deciding to buy up the debt of this country here at a negative yield. That's how desperate they are. That's how concerned they are about the crisis that we are currently in. Now, I said at the beginning, it's brewing. Well, the worst of it is brewing, but we're already in it today, and that is for certain. Now, look at this right here. I'm noting gold as an example, but it goes with anything. This is spot gold priced in the Ukrainian currency. Now look how dramatic this rise has become in such a short period of time. They're experiencing a hyperinflation right now. There's much turmoil going on in there. We see what's happening with Russia, with NATO on the other side. We can see them trying to be split up in the wars and everything that's taking place. A lot of much of the information being shielded. We don't know exactly what's going on, but we do know how it is affecting the individual, and that is hyperinflation. But when you price it in gold, look how different the situation becomes. So if you were an owner of precious metals, in this case gold, you would be doing extremely well in relation to those holding currency. Of course, if you try to get your money, it might be a little bit of a challenge. That's why I say to people, you don't necessarily want to own all gold and silver, and particularly you want to have small denominations. It makes it very, very important. But let's just look at this for the time being. What I wanted to show you is that if you hold onto real assets, you will be significantly better off than those who are putting all their savings in cash, those who have the paper currencies. You want to hold real assets because the system of debt, the system of control that they have set up is relying on you putting all of your savings into their hands. And of course, when the time comes, they will implement the capital controls, they will implement a bank holiday, they will commit to the bail-in strategy. They have all of these things. They call them levies, they call them taxation, call them whatever you want. The system is set up by the bankers. They use debt to conjure up this system, and they're not backing down from it. Look at Ukraine right here. The Ukrainian currency plunges after capital controls, minimum wage below Ghana. What do you think is going to happen? I'll read you this. Ukraine's currency plunged on Wednesday after the national bank introduced capital controls, and the country's minimum wage fell below that of impoverished African countries, while real consumption fell 40%. Now, of course, when this currency is being hurt so badly, the people aren't prepared. Most of the people, 99% of the people, are not going to be prepared. What do you think is going to happen? And that is real consumption falling to such a degree. This doesn't surprise me at all. We can see that this has happened right now in other countries as well as historically. Pretty amazing to see that. Now, this right here was an easy prediction that I made just a few videos ago, and that is Obama vetoes the Keystone XL pipeline, and that was pretty obvious. This is out of Reuters. You can read the article for yourself, but the point is made right in the title, is that Congress had passed this Keystone pipeline, and they said that Obama would, of course, have to veto it, and here he is, right here. It doesn't take a crystal ball, it doesn't take a soothsayer, it doesn't take any sort of magic potion to be able to read the future when it is this easy. Obviously, he's going to veto the pipeline, and he did it, of course. So this is what goes to show you how the politicians, in fact, are able to manipulate anything to fit those who are in control for real. Now, do you for a minute think that any of the politicians are actually deciding what happens? No, it's all about campaign contributions. It's all about who is funding them. Watch the flow of the money. Look at who it's going towards, and you will be able to see how they make their votes, how they make their decisions, and I assure you, it never benefits the individual. I hope that you found this video informative. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. I truly appreciate that. And I just wanted to note to you that I have officially replied to almost every single email. There has been a few more in my inbox. I emailed back every single one of those on the insiders, went over to the david@themoneygps.com email, and I only have a handful of those left in there. I'm trying to get back to you all. Thank you very much for those emails. I try to keep them concise, but I also would like to give you as much detail as I can. But I'm also, just to let you know, I do reply to a lot of the same questions that I get through my email in these videos. So if you hear me repeating stuff occasionally, that's because often I get a lot of the same questions, and that is, obviously people are getting into this. This is their first video perhaps that they've seen on this type of topic. Perhaps they're new at this, so of course they're going to have questions. So I'd like to reiterate the points and hope to get to those more in future videos as well. So don't forget to become an insider, because that's where I give out all my best intel for free. That is available at themoneygps.com. You just scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.